The last delivery. I should have listened to my gut. It was a slow Tuesday night, and I was near the end of my shift at Tony's Pizzeria, a small hole-in-the-wall place that barely stayed in business. The kind of joint where the tiles were cracked, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the pizza boxes smelled more of grease than actual food. I was counting down the minutes until closing when the phone rang. Tony answered, scribbled something down, and looked up at me. "One last delivery," he said. I groaned. "Come on, man. It's almost midnight." He shrugged. "They're paying extra." That got my attention. I needed the cash. Rent was overdue, and my car barely had enough gas to get home. "Where to?" I asked. Tony slid the slip across the counter. The address was in a part of town I didn't recognize, a place called Blackwood Lane. I frowned. "This isn't on the GPS," I muttered. Tony sighed, rubbing his bald head. "Just take the main road out past the highway. You'll see a dirt path on the left. It's way out there, middle of nowhere." I hesitated. "You sure this is legit?" He smirked. "You scared?" I snatched the pizza box off the counter. "Screw you. I'll be back in 20. That was my first mistake. The drive was long, longer than it should have been. The town lights faded behind me, replaced by endless trees and an empty road. No street lights, no houses, just darkness pressing against my car. Then finally I saw it, a narrow dirt path, almost hidden by overgrown weeds. The sign was barely readable, Blackwood Lane. My headlights cut through the fog as I turned onto the path, my tires crunching against the gravel. Trees loomed on either side, gnarled branches reaching over the road like skeletal fingers. I shivered. I checked the address again. 13 Blackwood Lane. But there were no other houses, no numbers, no signs of life, just one building at the end of the road. A house. No, not a house. A mansion. It was old Victorian style with cracked windows and rotting wood. The front porch sagged, and the whole structure seemed like it was being swallowed by the forest. A single light flickered in one of the upstairs windows. Someone was home. I parked, gripping the pizza box tighter than I needed to. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but I needed the money. So I walked up to the door and knocked. For a long time there was nothing, just the wind. Then, creak, the door swung open on its own. I took a cautious step forward. "Hello?" No answer. I should have left, but instead I stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mold and something else, something metallic. Blood. I swallowed hard. "Hey, pizza delivery?" Silence. The house was huge, but empty. Dust-covered furniture, peeling wallpaper, a grandfather clock that had stopped at exactly 11:06. A staircase led up to the second floor, where the dim light flickered from one of the rooms. I took a deep breath. "Look, if no one's here, I'm leaving." Then, from upstairs, "Come in." The voice was soft, feminine. Something about it made my skin crawl. I turned to leave. Screw the money. But the door was gone. I spun around. It had been there. I had just walked through it. But now, where the exit should have been, there was nothing but solid wall. My heart pounded. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the top of the stairs. I looked up and saw her, a girl. She stood at the top of the staircase, barefoot, wearing a white dress stained red at the hem. Her hair hung over her face, long and stringy, her limbs too thin, too sharp. I took a step back. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. She just tilted her head. Then she moved. Not walked, moved. 1 second she was at the top of the stairs. The next, she was standing right in front of me. My stomach dropped. Her breath smelled like rotten meat. Her fingers twitched at her sides. And then, slowly, she whispered, "You brought me food." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then her mouth stretched, not just a little, wide, unnaturally wide, splitting her lips open like something out of a nightmare. Her teeth weren't human, too many, too sharp. And she was hungry. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. The house twisted around me, hallways stretching, doors leading to nowhere. My own footsteps echoed, chased by a sound I will never forget. Her laughing, soft at first, then louder, closer. "Why are you running?" Her voice slithered through the walls. "I just want my food." I turned a corner and slammed into something wet. A wall. No, not a wall. A body. It hung from the ceiling, suspended by hooks, its face frozen in a scream. My stomach heaved. I staggered back, and she was there, too close, her hands wrapped around my throat. Cold fingers, strong fingers. I gasped, kicking, clawing, but she didn't even flinch. She just smiled. "You shouldn't have come." Black spots danced in my vision. My lungs screamed. Then, a sound. A deep, echoing chime. The grandfather clock. 11:06. The grip loosened. The girl shuddered, her form flickering, breaking apart like static. I didn't wait. I ran. Somehow I made it out. I don't remember how. One moment I was drowning in darkness. The next, I was outside, gasping for air, the cold night pressing against my skin. The house was gone. No road, no Blackwood Lane, just trees. I stumbled to my car, shaking hands, fumbling for the keys. I didn't stop driving until I saw streetlights again. I quit my job the next day, but something still isn't right. Every night at 11:06 I hear it. That voice, soft, laughing. "You brought me food." And when I look in the mirror, she's there, smiling, waiting. The last delivery. 1. Started like any other night. I was halfway through my shift at Mario's Pizza, counting down the minutes until I could clock out. Fridays were always rough. Drunken customers, late-night orders, and the occasional creep who'd stare too long when I showed up at their door. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to what happened that night. I had just finished a delivery when my phone buzzed. A new order popped up on the screen. Order, large meat lovers pizza. Address, 609 Blackwood Lane. Payment, cash. I frowned. I'd never heard of Blackwood Lane. I turned to my manager, Joe. "Where's this place?" He barely looked up. "Never heard of it. You want it or not?" I hesitated. A cash order this late? Kinda sketchy. But I needed the tips. I grabbed the pizza and left. I shouldn't have. 2. Blackwood Lane wasn't on GPS. I drove around in circles before finally finding an old dirt road at the edge of town, hidden between two dead trees. There was no street sign, just a rusted mailbox with 609 barely visible on the side. The road stretched into the darkness. No houses, no streetlights, just endless trees on both sides. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but the thought of a good tip pushed me forward. The deeper I went, the colder it got. My breath fogged up, even though it was still summer. Then suddenly, a house appeared. It was an old Victorian mansion, rotting at the edges, its windows dark and empty, the kind of place you'd see in horror movies and immediately avoid. A single porch light flickered. Someone was home. I parked, grabbed the pizza, and walked up to the door. The air smelled wrong, like old wood and something rotting underneath. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again, harder. "Pizza delivery." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the door creaked open. No one was there. I leaned forward. Hello." Still nothing. I should have left. Instead, I stepped inside. 3. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and grabbed the handle. Locked. My stomach twisted. The house was freezing. Dust covered every surface. Sheets draped over old furniture, and the air smelled stagnant, like it hadn't been lived in for years. "Hello," my voice echoed. No answer. Then, from upstairs, a whisper. "Come up." Every hair on my body stood up. I wasn't alone, for I didn't want to move, but something unseen pushed me forward. I climbed the staircase, my footsteps muffled by the dust. The whole house breathed around me, like the walls themselves were alive. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched into darkness. Then I saw it. A door slightly open. A faint light flickered inside. I stepped closer, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, just a table. A rotting pizza sat in the center, covered in mold, its box disintegrating with age. And beside it, a delivery bag, one just like mine, with a name tag still attached. Chris Mario's Pizza. My blood ran cold. Chris. I knew that name. He was a delivery driver from our store. He went missing last year. 5. I stumbled back. That's when I saw the photographs, lining the walls, dozens of them, all different delivery drivers, all wearing Mario's Pizza uniforms, their eyes scratched out. My stomach turned. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. Then, the whisper came again. Are you hungry? I turned and saw her, a girl, barely 8 years old, standing in the doorway. Her skin was gray, like she'd been left in the cold too long. Her hair hung in wet clumps over her face, and her eyes, they were just holes, black, empty. My breath hitched. WH, who are you? She tilted her head. Then she moved, not walked, not ran, just appeared 1 second in the doorway, the next right in front of me. Cold air rushed over me, and my vision blurred. The room spun. Then she whispered, You brought me food. 6. I tried to run, but the house wouldn't let me. The walls stretched. The floor caved in, turning into a dark, bottomless pit. And the photos, they started moving. Mouths opened in silent screams. The delivery drivers writhed in their frames, their hands pressed against the glass, begging for help. The girl's smile widened. She lifted a rotting slice of pizza and held it out to me. Eat, she whispered. I shook my head. No, her face twisted. You have to eat, she hissed. Then her fingers stretched, long bony claws curling around my wrist. I screamed. The darkness swallowed me whole. 7. I woke up outside. The house was gone. No Widow's Lane, no trees, just an empty lot at the side of Old Mill Road. My car was still running. The pizza box was gone. I got in and floored it. I quit the next day, but the nightmares never stopped. Every night at 11:06, I wake up to the same sound, thump, thump, like bare feet on wooden floors. And when I look in the mirror, she's there, smiling, waiting. Delivery to hell. It was supposed to be my last delivery of the night. Tony's Pizzeria wasn't exactly a great place to work, but it paid the bills. Most nights were routine, take the orders, make the deliveries, get stiffed on tips. But that night was different. I had just finished a drop-off when my phone buzzed. A new order, cash payment. I frowned. That was rare. Most people paid online. I checked the address. 13 Widow's Lane. My stomach tightened. I'd never heard of that street before. I tapped the GPS. No results found. Weird. Hey, Tony, I called. Where's Widow's Lane? Tony, who was already halfway through a beer, looked up. His face went pale. You sure about that address? I showed him my phone. He stared at it for a moment, then shook his head. Forget it. I'll cancel the order. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Tony hesitated. Because that place doesn't exist. I laughed. It's on the ticket, man. Someone called in, right? Tony's jaw tightened. Yeah, but no one's lived on Widow's Lane for 20 years. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. Instead, he grabbed my phone, deleted the order, and tossed it back to me. Go home, he muttered. That one ain't worth it. I should have listened, but I didn't. The thing about being broke is that you make stupid decisions. As I sat in my car, staring at the deleted order, I thought about rent, bills, the cash payment I was now missing out on. So I did something reckless. I called the number back. A voice answered on the first ring. A child's voice. Will you bring the pizza? The girl asked. My throat went dry. Yeah. What's the address again? 13. Widow's Lane. A chill ran down my spine. That street doesn't show up on GPS. A long pause. Then, take Old Mill Road. You'll find it. The line went dead. I don't know why, but I started driving. Old Mill Road was deserted. No houses, no lights, just endless trees stretching on both sides of the cracked pavement. Then I saw it. A dirt path, almost hidden by overgrown weeds. A rusted street sign stood crooked at the entrance. Widow's Lane. I hesitated. Tony's warning echoed in my head. No one's lived there in 20 years. But my hands were already gripping the wheel tighter. My foot pressed the gas. The road was barely wide enough for my car, and the trees were thick, their branches reaching over me like skeletal fingers. The further I drove, the colder it got. My breath came out in fog, even though it was summer. Then, out of nowhere, a house appeared. It stood alone in the clearing. A crumbling Victorian mansion, its windows shattered, the front door slightly ajar. And in the upstairs window, a little girl stood watching me. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I grabbed the pizza and stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath my weight. I knocked once. Silence. Then, the door swung open on its own. My breath hitched. Hello? No answer. I took a cautious step inside. Dust floated in the air. The walls were lined with old paintings, their eyes scratched out. A staircase led up to the second floor, where I had seen the girl. Your pizza's here, I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Still nothing. I should have left the box and bolted. Instead, I stepped further inside. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around. The door was gone. Not just closed, gone. My stomach lurched. My breathing quickened. Then, from upstairs, thump, a slow, dragging thump, like bare feet moving across the wooden floor. I looked up and saw her, the little girl. She stood at the top of the stairs, her dress soaked in something dark. Her hair hung over her face, and her eyes, they were missing. A deep, choking cold wrapped around me. My legs locked in place. Then she tilted her head and smiled. Finally, she whispered, you brought me food. The room spun, the walls twisted, and the house came alive. The paintings moved, their scratched-out faces twisting in agony. Shadows stretched from the corners of the room, crawling toward me. The girl's smile widened. Stay with me, she whispered. I'm so hungry. I stumbled back. My foot hit something soft. I looked down and saw another pizza box, old, moldy. Beside it, a rotting hand. My stomach heaved. More boxes littered the floor, piled in corners, stacked against the walls, and in each one, bones, delivery bags, rotting flesh, drivers' uniforms. My head spun. I wasn't the first. I turned to run, but the girl was already in front of me. Her hands shot out, ice-cold fingers gripping my throat. I just need one more, she hissed. The shadows swallowed me whole. I don't remember escaping. One moment I was choking, dying. The next, I was outside, gasping for air. The house was gone. No Widow's Lane, no trees, just an empty lot at the side of Old Mill Road. My car was still running. The pizza box was gone. I got in and floored it. I quit the next day, but the nightmares never stopped. Every night at 11:06, I wake up to the same sound, thump, thump, like bare feet on wooden floors. And when I look in the mirror, she's there, smiling, waiting. Dead on delivery. I knew something was off the second I got the order. It was almost midnight, and I was ready to clock out when the phone rang. Tony, my boss, answered, nodding as he scribbled down the address. When he hung up, he looked at me. One last delivery, kid. I sighed. Seriously? Big tip, he said. Guy paid in cash. Just take it and head home after. I grabbed the pizza box and glanced at the slip. Order large pepperoni. Address 42 Mulberry Road. My stomach dropped. There was no Mulberry Road in our town. Tony, I said slowly, this address isn't real. He just shrugged. That's what the guy gave me. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to go, but my bank account was screaming at me louder. I should have listened to my instincts. The drive took longer than expected. The GPS kept glitching, but I followed the directions as best I could. Eventually, I turned onto a narrow, twisting road surrounded by trees. No streetlights, no houses, just endless darkness. I checked my phone. No service. Great. Then, out of nowhere, a house appeared. It was an old Victorian-style mansion, sitting alone at the end of the road. The windows were dark except for a faint light flickering inside. Something about it felt wrong. The trees pressed in too close. The air was too still. And the deeper I stared at the house, the more it felt like it was staring back. I should have left, but I didn't. I walked up the creaking steps and knocked. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Pizza delivery. A long pause. Then slowly, creak. The door opened by itself. I hesitated, my skin crawling. Hello? No answer. I peered inside. The house was huge, dusty chandeliers, peeling wallpaper, antique furniture covered in sheets. Smelled like old wood and something else. Something rotten. I stepped inside. Just a few feet. Just enough to drop the pizza off. Then I heard it. A whisper. Come in. I froze. The voice was faint, almost like a breath, coming from deeper inside the house. I turned to leave. The door slammed shut behind me. My heart pounded. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted. Locked. I banged on the door. Hey, this isn't funny. No answer. Then somewhere upstairs. Thump. A slow, dragging thump. Like someone crawling. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest. My instincts screamed at me to run. But where? A grandfather clock stood in the hallway, frozen at 11:06. The only sound was my own breathing, until I heard it again. Thump. Closer this time. I turned toward the staircase, and that's when I saw her. She stood at the top of the stairs. A little girl, barefoot, dressed in white, but something was wrong. Her skin was gray, like she'd been drowned. Her hair hung in wet clumps over her face. And her eyes, they were just holes. Black, empty voids. My breath hitched. Who are you? She tilted her head. Then she moved. Not walked, not ran. Just appeared 1 second at the top of the stairs, the next right in front of me. Cold air rushed over me, and my vision blurred. The room spun. Then she whispered, "You brought me food." I stumbled back. The walls twisted. The house felt alive, shifting, stretching. I turned, trying to find an exit. Dead bodies hung from the ceiling, their faces twisted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. Blood dripped onto the floor, pooling around my shoes. I gagged. And the girl, she was smiling. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Her voice slithered into my ears. Stay. Eat with me. The room darkened. My body locked up. A deep, pulsing hunger filled my stomach, like something inside me was being hollowed out. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then, ding dong, the doorbell. The girl shuddered. Her form flickered, distorted, like a bad TV signal. The spell broke. I ran. The door was open. I didn't question it. I bolted outside, gasping for air. The night was silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking as I turned the key. The engine roared to life. But before I sped off, I looked up. The house was gone. No driveway, no trees, just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. As if the house had never existed. I quit the next day, but the nightmare didn't end. Every night at 11:06 I hear it. The whisper, "You brought me food." And when I look in my rearview mirror, she's there, smiling, waiting,